Hello, hello, my lovelies. Hola, hola, bellezas. This episode is going to be in English, so here comes the Spanish disclaimer. Este episodio va a ser en inglés, pero no se preocupen para todos los que están escuchando porque vamos a tener también subtítulos en nuestro video, así que si nos están viendo por video, ya sea por Spotify o YouTube, van a poder seguir con la conversación. This episode I am really excited about. It's an episode I've been wanting to film for a while. We have a great guest. Her name is Mannat. She works at one of the biggest tech companies and social media companies in the world right now. I found her on TikTok. She posted a video on TikTok, and we have such a similar life that I felt an instant connection with her. Not only is she a brilliant professional, but she has this way of speaking and explaining things that helps you connect with her so easily. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about law, becoming an attorney in the US, working in big law, in a big law firm versus working in house at a tech company. What are the differences? What are the main struggles? What can you do to achieve that next level in your career, to receive that promotion? Is big law as scary as people say it is? Are the hours as long? This and so much more in today's episode. You won't want to miss it. Thank you so much for being here. And without further ado, let's welcome our guest. Hello, Mannat. Welcome to 888 Hotline. Thank you for being here with us. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited to be here.
For those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your career, and how you got into the position you are right now.
So I'm Mannat. I am a product counsel lawyer at a big tech company. And I've been at this tech company for about 3 years. And prior to that, I was at a big law firm for about 3.5 years. I've been in sort of the technology space. At the law firm, I was doing transactions on the corporate side, but specializing in tech and IP issues. And I went to law school in New York, and I've been living in New York for 9.5 years, which feels crazy.
Wow.
But I actually grew up kind of all over the world. So I was born in India, grew up in Australia, Canada, and then moved over here, like I said, 9.5 years ago. So a bit of a diverse background there.
That's crazy. I didn't know your background, like you had lived in so many places. I feel like in a
Yeah,
way
and
that
even
had
in
to shape you.
Definitely. And even in those countries, we had different moves. So in Canada, we moved a few different places. So for a while there, we were moving almost every 2 years, which is really interesting. It kind of shapes you definitely as a young child. Yeah.
I wonder, did you always know you wanted to be like an attorney?
So it's funny. I have a vivid memory in high school of my dad driving me to school, and we were talking about kind of what do I want to be. And I think it's maybe a little bit of the like immigrant child mentality of in my mind. It was like lawyer, doctor, or like business consulting. And I just decided on the ride to school, like I think I'm just going to be a lawyer. So when I went into college, I studied health sciences, and I took a healthcare law course in college that I really enjoyed. And so when I was applying for law school and I got in, I sort of had that as my trajectory going into law school. And it wasn't until my kind of summer internships in school where I did work kind of in the healthcare space a little bit and realized it's very regulatory, particularly in the US. And so, it's like getting a little bit of that practical experience and realizing, oh, maybe that's not exactly what I would be interested in. And so I started to think like, what could be interesting? Like, what if I do this career? Like, what would I be interested in? But I just realized technology is an industry that I'm really interested in, and I think is just super fascinating and fast moving. And I also thought the job prospects would be great because every company is essentially a tech company. So
You know what I like what you said there? You said that you had to go into practice to figure out what you did not want, which I
Yeah.
think is a common misconception when it comes to the law. People go into law school thinking that they already know what type of lawyer or attorney they would want to be. I
Hmm.
thought I was going to do international law the entire time. I just had it in
Yeah.
my head because we have an idea,
Yes.
whether that's what we've seen in movies or series or like
Hmm.
books, or we have a relative that works in the area. But it is really
Yeah.
hard, especially when you're just in law school, to figure out what you want because everything is so like it's about theory, right? So it's not until
Yeah.
you go into the practice area that you understand, okay, maybe this is not the path I should be following and I should just move into something different.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's interesting. Law is one of those industries that is a bit gate kept until you're actually
Yeah.
practicing.
Definitely. I want to talk now about some of the internships you said you had. Were all of
Yeah,
these in law firms? Was a law firm the final goal for you? Because at least for me, I think that in law school, they make it seem as like the end. I almost feel like that should be the path you're taking. So I just want to hear a little bit about your story and how you ended up working in big law in the beginning.
totally. So I did not know any lawyers. Like I didn't come, no one in my family's a lawyer. I didn't really have much of an understanding. And like I said, not growing up in the US, I didn't even really know what big law was. And I went to NYU law school. That is exactly kind of what you hear a lot of is, okay, big law is kind of private practice is like where most people are headed. Is so in law school you have these summer breaks. So after that first year, I did an internship. I split my time between a big law firm and a big pharmaceutical company. And I was lucky enough to have both of those opportunities. And I was one of those people in my first year who was just networking like crazy and applying to everything and really just, again, trying to figure out what I'd be interested in.
Let's talk about big law for a second. Let's go back to your first year, first time you get a job. I'm sure it was very exciting. It was a big accomplishment, probably a goal you've had since you started law school. What was
Yeah.
like that first year and the 3 years that followed? What was it like both for you professionally, work wise, but also for you personally?
It was, incredible in a lot of ways. The first thing you said really hit the nail on the head. I mean, I had in my mind, this dream of being a corporate lawyer in New York and all of the cliches. Like in my mind, I watched Suits. I had kind of this glossy, really sexy image of what it was to be a lawyer. And I romanticized the stress too. Like it was like, I'm going to be so busy. I'm going to be staying up all night. I'm going to be just like working. And mind you, I'm a millennial, so I really grew up in like that girl boss era. And so when I got, the big law firm that I was at is like, one of the biggest firms in the world, and it was like really my dream. And I was lucky enough to be in the group that I wanted, which is that tech and IP group. And so I really felt like just so lucky, so on top of the world. Starting even just that first summer internship where they really like, woo you and you have like this incredible summer and it's like no work and all play. It's so much fun. And then you start, your first year, you're still sort of ramping up. So I didn't get super busy right away. And I just, the fact that I had like an office and I had, these interesting deals that I was on, it was just all very exciting. And I think that lasted for a while. And then the real stuff really starts to kick in. I don't want to sound like I had no idea that I was going to get busy, but I always say there's just such a difference of when you're in it and you actually have to feel day in and day out what it's like to, sleep 4 hours a night, or be up all night for a signing, or just be really stressed out because of the urgency of the work. Like it just, you can say that and people had told me that, but until you're really living it, it's really hard to know what that's going to feel like. But I still was like, the first couple of years, you're learning so much. I worked with great people. I had great friends at the firm. And so it was almost like being in like camp or in this like really
Yeah.
intensive process where you're all in it together. And like all my friends were also doing the same sort of thing. And so it just, that becomes your bubble. And, I really look back on that time as like a really great growth period. You're learning a lot. You're just trying to survive and like get through the next day. And it wasn't until, a few years later where I kind of really, for me, was like when the pandemic hit that I like came up for air and sort of started to reevaluate things.
It was an incredible accomplishment. And for those that are not in the law space, especially in the US, not only is getting into big law hard, but getting into big law and starting in tech and IP is very rare. Usually you go into the commercial area or like the corporate area and then you move in into the more niche area. So what you did was definitely a big accomplishment. And something you said was so funny about you wanted or you were romanticizing being busy. I felt the exact same way. There was a period of time that I would talk to my friends, and it was almost like we were flexing on who is busier that day. And it's like, yeah,
Yes.
I slept 2 hours yesterday. And after a while of having those conversations, you're like, is this what it's supposed to be like? Is this actually a flex, like the way I thought it was supposed to be? And to your point, yes,
Mm-hmm.
we knew in a way that it was going to be that way. They tell you about the long nights and they tell you about the career stress, but knowing it and then feeling it in your body and understanding what is causing
Mm-hmm.
to your body, to your health, both
Mm-hmm.
mentally but also physically, and the strain it takes on you
Yes.
when you're not sleeping, when you are basically in fight or flight 24/7.
Yeah.
And there's really no breaks in big law. It's like we're talking weekends, we're talking holidays where the grind
Yeah.
really never stops. I think that there's a lot of people very similar to you that during the pandemic, they kind of looked at life and they were like, you had a chance to stop, which is very rare
Yeah.
nowadays, to have a chance to stop and think about it and see, okay, is this what I want moving forward? And I want you to talk a little bit about like how that decision played out in your head because I am sure that it wasn't easy, especially like you said, you had achieved this big dream. You made it. You were like in the path you've always wanted to. How hard was it making this decision? How long did you have to think about it? What were the things that were like going on and around your head?
It was so difficult to make that decision. To even acknowledge that I was thinking about the decision to leave was so difficult for me because I think you touched on this in a really astute way. It becomes your whole world, it becomes your whole identity. You know, when you're in a job like that and you let it, I think there are some people who I saw have better boundaries, but really, like, for a lot of people, it can be all consuming. There's no off button. It's like your dream. You worked so hard to get here. You spent so much time and energy and effort to be here. And, you know, you're in a lot of ways, you're getting compensated well. You know, I knew people in my class who were kind of helping out their families. And there's just, you know, there's so much sometimes riding on it. Loans, if you have loans, there's just so much that I think the biggest thing that was challenging for me was just that it was a part of my identity. I had wanted this for so long. And you know, had this dream of becoming a partner. You know, there's people who go into big law and think I'm going to be here for a few years and then I'll probably leave. I really went with that like idealistic, I'm going to be here, and I was doing really well, and I was getting great feedback, and you know, partners were giving me so much work and challenging work, which you know, in a way, was like a good problem to have. Um, and so it was just really hard for me to think about stepping away from that. And, you know, if you are like me at all, type A, anxiety, there's a big fear of the unknown. And so when that pandemic time happened and I had a moment, I didn't really have any kind of break from the work, but I had a moment to be home with my family. And it, you know, it was really like feeling the physical effects too. I had such a realization of I was in flight or flight for so long, and being around
Yeah.
my family and seeing like I was missing out on so many personal things, like their lives. I had missed birthdays and important events. And, you know, the world felt like it was coming to an end. And I was like, what am I doing this for again? And so, you know, one of the things that I think the first thing I actually had to do was uncouple like my identity from work and be like, give myself permission to change my dream. I think it took me time to realize like it's okay for my dream to change. It took me almost a year before I really got to the place of being like okay to look around. And one thing that really helped actually for me was seeing mentors of mine senior associates and people who all had the same experience and they were leaving. And I sort of realized, like, oh, you can be an amazing lawyer and be just like this person that I look up to and leave and choose a different path and change your dream and reevaluate your priorities. And just seeing people do that and realizing like this might be the next thing for me, it was a gradual process, but eventually I started to just reach out to people. I really just did cold emails on LinkedIn and emails of people I knew to see, what else was out there. And that's how I found the role of product counsel and started to get really excited about a new thing. But it really was like such a difficult decision. And I say that knowing that in hindsight, the risk of going from a big firm to a big tech company is not very significant. But, in the moment, it feels like, oh my God, I'm walking away from everything. And this is like such a big deal. But looking back in hindsight, like you just have to bet on yourself and you will always figure it out. If you make the wrong move, like you'll correct course. But at the time, it was just really hard to see it that way.
You said a couple of things that I feel are so inspiring and important to just bring back up. The first one is how easy it is for us to tie our worth and identity to our job and our profession, especially in law.
Yeah.
I know and I understand that explaining to anyone that you're an attorney, but not only an attorney, but a big law attorney, comes with certain like prestige to it.
Yeah.
And when you're used to it and when you're used to that level of respect someone is giving you, it's really hard, especially when you're young and you're in your 20s. It is
Mm-hmm.
really hard to try to step away from that and understand like, hey, my value actually does not just come from where I work or what I do for a living. Like my
Right.
value just comes from me, from being human, from all the amazing things I have to bring into this world. But it is hard to do so, to your point, and that's why I think it maybe took you so long. The
Absolutely.
other thing you said that I think it's so important is your dreams are allowed to change. At least for me, and I would love to hear your thoughts about this. A lot of the fear about changing my dreams is because I saw our parents' generation, and they usually would
Mm-hmm.
go into a job very young, and their life, the American dream or whatever you want to call it, was to work up the corporate ladder or whatever the
Mm-hmm.
equivalent was and go to the top and then
Mm-hmm.
retire. Then you bring up our generation, and I feel like millennials kind of jump around from one company to another. Gen Z does it even more. But I've
Mm-hmm.
tried to explain this concept of your dreams are not supposed to be linear. Like you will change
Mm-hmm.
around life and your interests
Mm-hmm.
will change and your priorities will change. And moving companies, moving jobs, even moving professions doesn't mean you're abandoning your old dreams. It's almost like a lily pad where you're just jumping from one lily pad to another and taking with you all these valuable lessons that you learn from your
Mm-hmm.
previous role and then moving them forward to something else.
I absolutely agree. I think that's a great analogy of lily pads, and that's exactly what happens. And one of the things you said that I absolutely agree with, and definitely felt is that, like looking at the generation before us, but I think for me at least, it's a little bit deeper where it's, if you have a narrative about yourself, that you're a hardworking person, that you stick to your goals, that you are driven and, you really commit to something. It is so hard to, if there's this narrative in your head, like if I leave, I'm a quitter. I didn't have what it takes. You hear that a lot in the industry where people are like, oh yeah, I mean, it's not for everyone. Being a partner is not for everyone. Like that is so hard to, you don't want to think that about yourself, right? And I think, the reality is that's just not the case. It's not that the people who end up staying are just, like superior as a lawyer or in work ethic or anything. It's literally just your priorities change. People have different ways that they want to live their life. And I have the utmost respect for like partners and, senior people at firms. But there is, when you get close to that world and you see how the sausage is made, there is a lot of sacrifice and you don't really get gold medals for it. Like there's not, you don't have to, this idea of like self-sacrifice is it's your life, and I think that's one of the things I had to realize is do I care more about winning this gold medal of like sticking through something, even though it's hurting me physically, mentally, emotionally, all my relationships. And honestly, I'm just kind of tired of it. Like, or do I care more about like, this is my one precious life, you know? And and everyone makes that decision differently. And it's not the case that you didn't have what it takes. It's like, you can do it. Do you want to? I always ask myself that, like, I can do it. Do I really want to? And you know, it's a different decision for each person.
That was beautifully said. I I want to go and fast forward a little bit into moving then into this big tech company. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
before we even talk about it, I've realized that we've never discussed why maybe working in house is a little bit different than working in a law firm. I think that we just assume that everyone knows this and maybe people
Yeah.
don't. So,
Yeah.
just from your perspective and your opinion, what would be the main key differences between working at a law firm versus working in house at a company?
So in my experience, there's, I would say, probably three key things. The
Hmm.
first thing is the work life balance and lifestyle. Typically, as we've been talking about, when you're in an outside counsel, private practice, big law kind of role, you know, your value add is being on call, being available, your time, and there is an expectation of that typically, right? So that, you know, brings a certain kind of work life balance or lack thereof and lifestyle. In-house, generally speaking, there are obviously differences. You have a bit of an exchange. Sometimes you exchange a little bit of money for that work-life balance. So you might get paid a little bit less, but you have an off button. You'll probably have weekends. You'll
Yeah.
probably have nights. You know, I think the second thing is actually your role as an attorney is very different when you're outside counsel versus in-house. When you're in-house, you are really part of the team. You're part of the business team. Your value add is not just being a lawyer who says like this is a red flag and this is why, but is really understanding the business, understanding the product, understanding like what your team is trying to accomplish. And so you have a lot more of a, in my experience, dynamic role where you have to be a lawyer, but you also have to understand the business. You also have to have that people skill, like relationship building, because you have to get buy-in for the things that you're saying. Whereas as outside counsel, your role is really to be a lawyer. You're, you know, that's what you're hired to do, and you're hired for a specific thing. Whether you're, you know,
Hmm.
a litigator and you're doing a specific case, or you're corporate and you're doing a deal. Once that deal's done, you move on to the next, right? And so, even though you can have a relationship with the client, it's not your value add is not like knowing everything inside and out and building the relationships with all the team members. It's get this like legal thing done,
Yeah.
and you know, it's a just totally different role. And the third thing I would say is the culture of a, at least in my experience, a big tech company and a firm. When you're at a private practice firm, typically it's a little bit more traditional. There's a little bit more of a buttoned up kind of formality to
Yeah.
it. It's like the subtle things with culture, right? It's like being on, but it's also just the way that people talk about things. In my experience, you know, you can build great relationships, but there's less of a discussion about someone's like whole life. It's more about like the work, and there's, you know, there's some benefits to that. It's like very like, you know, traditional and formal. Whereas in house, you know, again, my experiences in a big tech company, there's just a different culture. You're at a company. You're not just with
Yeah.
lawyers. You've got products, you've got designers, you've got so many personalities. And you know, when you're in the law field, you're really used to the lawyer personality. When you're in a company, there's just a complete different shift in culture. You know, those are the three things. I mean, there's a lot, but those are the three things I would pick out.
Definitely. I think that's a great summary. And now let's go. I want to talk a little bit about that first year in like big tech. Let's call it's big tech. Let's call it big tech. That
Yeah, it's
first
big tech.
year,
Yeah.
how was it for you, the transition? Was it a hard transition to do? How have you been feeling? Do you feel like your career has still been able to progress, or do you feel like the progression is a little not as clear as maybe you would have like a path that it's almost like constructed for you in a big law firm where you
Yeah.
know what the next step is? And how has your idea of like work changed since joining tech?
Those are great questions. So the first year was so funny, the first few months, I'll say, because um, I, you know, went from college to law school to this big law firm and then to big tech. So that was kind of met my range. I didn't have any other experience. So I went into my first year at this tech company with the same energy that I had at the firm, meaning I was like, all right, full force. I just like was I would make work for myself on a weekend. Like I remember spending a Saturday
Mm.
writing this huge document together about this like proposal and presenting it to my manager, and she was like, what are you doing? Like she was like, we don't work on weekends. Like we are not,
Yeah.
I do not want you to do that. Like don't, even the company I'm at, there's a kind of like unspoken policy where at a certain time at the workday your messages kind of go auto silent. So there's a little pop up that sort of says, like, this is outside of that person's work hours. Do you really want
Yeah.
to send this message? And that's, great because there's people in all different time zones. So I didn't realize that was culturally a true thing. And I was just like, right, sending messages at like 8 p.m. my time. And like, again, my manager's like, we don't do that. Like we don't want to notify someone when it's outside of their hours unless it's super urgent. And so that was an adjustment for me because again,
Yeah.
my value add in the firm, at least in my experience, really the billable hours. Whereas in tech and in house, like you don't have billable hours, so it's not like this. There's not an incentive to kind of produce work, and I was missing like what my value add was. I didn't realize like it's learning the product, talking to the team, understanding what they care about, what their goals are, trying to understand how I can best deliver the legal advice in a way that makes sense to them. So that just took a bit of time to realize, like, oh, I have to do a different thing here. And that was kind of funny. Like my manager totally understood, and she was like, "All right, let's transition into like in-house kind of culture." And I was very formal. Like my picture was like in my suit, and everyone else is like showing up in jeans, So it's just like
Yeah.
those little things. But I also like I should say the role that I went in house. So I was doing like corporate transactions in the tech and IP space at the firm, and I shifted to a role called product counsel, where you're really working with the business teams. You're like integrated with them, and you're advising and counseling on the product development. So you're not really doing diligence. You're not, in my experience, you're not doing like contract based work. It's very much like being a general counsel of a team.
Yeah.
And so the skill set's very different. And I wanted that change. That was part of the reason why I wanted to leave, was to get that new skill set. It was really exciting because I really wanted to be closer to the business. That's one of the objectives I had going in house. And I really was so excited to learn about these products and to like understand what different people in the teams do, and honestly work with non-lawyers. It was like great. And I have to say, I know there are some people who just really love the law. I'll be honest, like I'm not I'm not like one of those people who's like just loves the letter of the law. I like the application of law to like business, and I like it as a tool. But it was just kind of like a fish right in the right water. I felt like I was like, finally, I can like use my strengths in a way that like really adds value, and is it just felt like it clicked really well, which was great. And I think that has continued to this day. So I'm almost 3 years in, and I just feel like I'm continuing to learn and build new skills. But I feel like my strengths are well suited for this role. Um, in terms of career progression, it is very different, and that's one of the key differences as well between a big law firm and in house, is that you have this like lockstep method in a big law firm. Every year, you just with as time goes on, you just get more senior. You become a first year, second
Yeah.
year, third year, fourth year, and then the pay also increases in that way. So you're kind of just automatically on that escalator. Whereas in house, that was one of the fears I had, is like, how do you progress? It is definitely different, but it's different in a way that you kind of have more control over your career. So one of the things you have in house is like you have a manager, which you don't really have at a law firm, and your manager's role is to guide you and help make sure you're
Mm-hmm.
achieving your career objectives. So I had set out, in my first year, I want to have a promotion, and like how do we get to that place? And I did. I got a promotion after my first year, and the like it's not necessarily expected that like every year you're going to get a promotion. That's typically not the case. But some companies it's 2 years, some companies it's like a year and a half. It really depends. And that's what I've learned, is like you really have to take ownership over your career and say, this is what I want. This is how I think I'm going to get there. Tell me if you think this is like the right thing I should be working on. Just recently, I had a conversation with my manager. Let's like reshift the work on my plate so that I have a new kind of skill set coming in, and I can use that for the next promotion. One of the things I learned that not everyone is gunning for a promotion at all times. Sometimes people are working towards a new skill set. Sometimes people are trying to become managers, and it didn't even occur to me that you could have different goals. So that's super interesting too. It's like it's just a different kind of puzzle piece that you can put together yourself.
I love that you said that you have to take ownership of it. The question I get
Yeah.
asked the most is, how do you get promoted? And I always say step one is having a conversation with your manager, being like open
Yeah.
and truthful about it and say, this is my goal. And to your
Yeah.
point, promotions look very different in house. So you could try to become a people manager if that is your goal, which could be considered a
Yeah.
promotion, or you can become a more specialized, like, attorney in a way. But the only way of making this happen when there is not like a designated path already set for you is sitting down and saying, this is my goal. This is when I want to achieve it. This is my plan. I have to achieve it. Do you think this is a good idea? Can I have some input for you? What can I do in order to make this happen? But if we don't have these conversations, which, by the way, are hard conversations to have,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you have
Yeah.
anxiety and are a people pleaser and almost expect people to praise you without you advocating for, unless you don't sit down and have these conversations, no one will have them for you. And no one will ever hand you a promotion just because. So, other than talking to a manager, would you give us like two or three quick tips on how you feel you can move into like the next step of the corporate ladder?
One thing that I think is really important across the board, no matter what role you're in, but certainly when you're in house, is networking and reaching out and building relationships with people. And that can look like internally in your company, reaching out, setting coffees with people, if you're in an office, like striking up those conversations. Because sometimes the best way to move up is actually going to another team, or
Yeah.
there's a lot of unspoken opportunities there sometimes, or there's a client who has this actually happened to me, has this really big project coming up that could be high visibility and a great like value and impact thing for you to be able to get to the next step. And I was just having a conversation with this person, and they were like, you should be the counsel for this, like I would love to work with you on this. And that just those kinds of like interactions are not always like you said, they're not handed to you. So sometimes just
Mm-mm.
having that like open mind, building relationships, talking to people, talking to your clients, is I think a really useful tool. You never know when an opportunity might arise in someone else's team that's a big step, or just a good opportunity to kind of get more visibility. The second thing is to focus on getting those like high impact projects. So one of the things I had to learn early on is, like I said, it's not about just like doing work. It's about what kind of work you're doing. And there was a time where I was early on in house that I was just kind of doing a lot of low visibility and not super impactful work. And that was important at that time to get the skills. But,
Yeah.
as you get more senior, like trying to understand, is this project something that is going to add value, that's going to be impactful, where I can really explain in my end of year performance review, like the impact that I made. Like I didn't, there's certain things that can be more quantitative and can really show like, oh, this unblocked a huge issue we were having in the company. And that I think is really important, especially because as lawyers, sometimes it's harder to show that kind of impact. Whereas like engineer or product, they can have that like, I resolved X number of tickets. Like trying to look out for those opportunities and invest your time there as much as you can. And then I think the third thing would be to think about where you might be lacking in your skills. So try to see like where could you be lacking, because you want to make it super easy for your manager to put you up for a promotion. And like really all of this goes to your own initiative, like reaching out to people, like getting those high impact projects, and really making sure you covered all your skill sets and all your bases. to kind of put you in that best position. And ultimately, I will say, sometimes it really is. You could do all those things, and it's just like a business need. Sometimes there just isn't a need for a promotion, or they're just, everyone's trying to do the same thing. So not to beat yourself up too much about it, because sometimes it is out of your control. But I think those things are the things you can at least try to put yourself in the best position.
Completely. I agree with all of that, especially the networking part. I think that a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
time, once you join a company, you kind of take a step back and you're like, yeah, these are the people I work with on a regular basis. This is
Right.
my role. This is my job. And it's hard for you to be like, no, actually, you should be meeting people all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You should be talking to other teams, see what opportunities are there, whether it's a new product or a new business line that's opening up, that your skill set could be very valuable. And the other thing that you said that
Right.
I thought was really important, that was actually a lesson I learned working in tech, is you have to be operating at the level of the promotion before you get promoted. And I did not know that,
Yes.
because in a lot of other companies, I feel a lot of it is like potential.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in tech, it's like, are you showing us already? Are you showing us that you can
Mm-hmm.
be the level above the level you are currently? Because if you're not, well, we can't really hand you the promotion. You have to be operating at least a cycle or two there so we know you're ready. And
Totally.
I think
Yeah.
that doing that and having like impactful projects, like you said, is always helpful. The other tip I give a lot is to be ready for performance review is just like keep a document like the entire
Mm-hmm.
year of all the projects
Mm-hmm.
you've been working on, because you forget, you work on so many things.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the year or mid-cycle review, you can look back at it and be like, oh yes, I did X project, Y project, and C project, and this was its impact. I can just copy paste it, and that'll be like easier for me to achieve. So before we go into our section for questions and answers, which I received a lot of questions for you, I want to talk about something that is very important, and we focus a lot on this podcast because we're always trying to be the best version of ourselves. And sometimes we equate that to just like our best professional version, but that's not entirely true. And we really have to take care of our mental health and of our mind and of our body. For those that don't know, other than being an amazing attorney, she puts out incredible content online. And actually, that's how we first met initially. She posted a TikTok working at the company she works for right now. And I just felt an immediate connection because I felt like our days to days were similar, but also the way we approach life and thought about a lot of things were really similar. And I felt really connected. And some of my favorite videos that you post, and I always save and I've tried to practice myself, is about a framework called Mind Body Craft. And I want you to talk to us a little bit about this, but also how you came up with this idea, because I think it's genius.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I feel the same way about your content, as we've talked about. Um, so, like we've talked about, I had a period of time where it was just work, work, work nonstop. And I think that sometimes when you're in that place where, the water, it feels like you're drowning, like there's just so much going on, there's not even a second to breathe. It can be so confusing to think about, like, how do I find balance? Everyone talks about work-life balance. And it's just so hard to put into practice. So when I was in that kind of place in my life, I was just desperate to try to have some kind of like normalcy, and I knew I needed to take care of my like physical body and my emotional self, but I also like just needed something to follow, and it had to be
Yeah.
easy. It had to be easy to remember, easy to implement, because again, we're so busy. And so I started by just searching different things online. I'm someone who loves frameworks, tools, ways to think about things. It just works really well in my brain. I feel like a lot of type A people, it's just kind of having something that is laid out for you is really helpful. And so I came up with my own framework, which is Mind Body Craft. And essentially, your mind, it's your internal state, your emotional state, everything internal to you. Your body, it's your physical body. And then your craft is like your passion, your interest, a thing that makes you feel alive. You might look at that and think, well, what about relationships? All of those things come after you take care of yourself. And so it's really about like, if you're nourishing yourself mentally and emotionally, you're going to show up better in your relationships. If you're sleeping well and taking care of your physical body, you're going to be able to like perform well in the things that you want to perform in. And then your craft, it can be your job, it can be your career, but it can be other things as well. And that I was able to sort of look at my life in these three pillars. And it's really simple. I just try to do one thing in each pillar each day. And I put out a workbook that you can see on my page. And so if you're interested in learning more, there's like a really easy to follow workbook. And there's a little bit more of a methodology to it if you're someone who likes that, where I do kind of a quarter system. So at the start of each quarter, I try to think about what are my three mind, body, craft goals going to be for this quarter. And the idea is just to like set an intention. It's not like hard firm because you can always change them as you go. But for right now, I can share mine. For my mind, I am focusing on meditation. There's this 20-minute meditation, which sounds like a lot, but they talk to you throughout it. So it sounds just like a nice little peaceful book that I do in the mornings. And it's such a game changer for just like my energy. And I've been doing that this quarter. My physical body, it's strength training. I'm really into like gaining strength and having like some power to me. So really focusing on strength training. And then for my craft, it's my podcast. So I launched a podcast this past year, the Mannat podcast, and like really learning how to explore topics in more depth and building that community from my online space into the podcast space, which has been so fun. And so those are just an example of like three of my sort of intentions for this quarter. And you really can take it or leave it, like however you like to kind of structure your life. But I think just really having a simple, like, okay, I'm going to do something for my mind, my body, and my craft every day, even if it's small. I just found that over time, it becomes so natural and becomes part of your lifestyle. And it has just changed my life and helped me so much because I just kind of feel like it's doable. I can do it. And my life is like 180 degrees more balanced than it was before I
Yeah.
started doing this.
I love how simple it is, yet how impactful it is. And for everyone's benefit, well, you know that we can find her podcast. It's called Mannat, please. Also, that's your handle on TikTok. And we'll add that in the bottom. But also, I'll make sure that I'm linking to all the resources you've pointed out, whether that's your podcast or your workbook, in the episode notes. So everyone can check them out and hopefully use them because I know they're very valuable. And now I would love to go to my personal favorite section of the podcast, which is questions and answers. We received a lot of questions from our listeners, and I'm going to pick my favorite three or four. One of the questions we actually received multiple times was, what are the key skills you think a lawyer should have to succeed in the tech industry?
Yeah. In my opinion, I think that one of the key things is, I'd call it like the language of law, business, and technology. So those are kind of the three languages that you kind of have to be well versed in, I think, in order to succeed. You have to know the law to some, you have to have the substance. You have to understand what laws apply to your industry, what your team or your company is subject to, and have that fundamental understanding. But you also, I think, in order to really succeed, need to understand the business, how it works, what it cares about, what do the teams care about, what's the objective, because you can give legal advice all day, but if it's not tailored to that business and the risk appetite of the business, it's just not going to either be listened to or it's not going to be adding value, right? The third thing is in tech. So for me, it's really important to understand the actual technology and what I'm working on. So for example, like APIs, that's like a way of sharing data. How do APIs work? What are the components of it? How does it work to, like, you don't have to become a computer science like engineer, but just having that language and understanding that terminology will get you so far, because if you can speak the language of the business people you're working with, of the engineers you're working with, the product managers, like they appreciate that so much. And I think it just gives you that step above. I think the second thing is also, we talked about this a little bit before, but really being able to foster relationships, like being someone that people enjoy working with is so important, because again, you could be giving the best advice, but if you don't have that rapport, that understanding, that relationship with your clients, with your team members, it's just not going to add that same kind of value. And you're not going to be able to progress in your career as well. So I think just really taking the time to do that. And then the last thing I think is actually something I wouldn't have thought about before, but I think you can really be a step above if you are up to date on what's going on in your industry. So, for
Yes.
example, when I was in like the corporate law world, I never, to be honest with you, I wasn't so interested in like mergers and acquisitions and like corporate structure, and I was more interested in the tech. But I still would be subscribed to the news of like the deal books that were happening that week just to understand what is going on in the industry, because the industry moves so fast. Law and technology specifically, it just moves so quickly. And if you like blink, like you'll miss a big thing or a big
Yeah.
decision. And I think just being someone who's like up to date, knows the current events, knows what's happening in the space, puts you that step above, even if it's as simple as being able to put yourself in a good position to predict where a thing's going to go. Your clients will notice, and it just helps you have that like extra edge.
My next question is actually a question that I love asking every single attorney, and is, what did you wish you knew before going into the law space?
Oh, wow. Okay. So this is something I think about a lot. No, like really understanding the substance of what it means to be a lawyer. There's a lot of ideas about what it means to be a lawyer, but I always say like your fundamental skill set as a lawyer is reading really complex, dense legal text, writing complex, dense legal text, being able to have attention to detail, huge,
Yeah.
and like honestly really caring about the details. And the reason I say this is, you know, there it doesn't mean you if you don't have those things you won't be successful, but I have found that the people who like really love being a true lawyer like are obsessed with all of those things. They
Yeah.
really digest that legal text. They like enjoy that complexity and the definitions and all the details. I'll be so honest, that is not the kind of lawyer that I am, and I wish I knew that going in, because again, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't go into this career or that it's not for you, but like I wish I really understood like that is really what a lawyer does. It doesn't matter if you're a litigator
Yeah.
or you're corporate or you're like your skill set is that a and the reason I wish I knew that is because there was a time where it was really difficult for me, like in law school and the beginning years. It was such those things didn't come as naturally to me, and so it I felt like I had to work 10 times harder to kind of get that innate, you know, like to really care about like the tiny like definitional change and realize that, oh, it changes a 300-page document, so I have to go through all of the pages. And it's okay if you're not like super passionate about it, but just like knowing that ahead of time, I think would have just helped me to be like, okay, this is something that I'm going to need to learn and I'm going to need to get good at. And then eventually I was able to pivot into a role that was a little bit more like a level above and systems thinking and all of that stuff. But that is what it means to be a lawyer, I would say.
You described my journey through law school and everything perfectly. I say that a lot. I was like, I feel like I'm very privileged and I'm very lucky that I ended up in a product role, and that
Yeah.
my skill set actually matches up to what it's supposed to be like. Like, what I'm good at is the reason why I'm great at my
Yes.
job. But for so
Yeah.
many years, and I did law school for 6 years because I did it in Colombia and then in the US. For a really long time, I was like, why do I have to read the same document 4 times? Whereas my
Mm-hmm.
colleagues just read it once. And like, how come I don't understand that one sentence or that one word that changed the
Mm-hmm.
entire document? But also, what am I doing with my life? Like, am I just going to
Yeah.
sit down and read page after page? I was like,
Yeah.
this is going to be
Page.
miserable.
Yeah.
And I thought that it was like, it was
Totally.
never going to end. And I was like, I chose the wrong career.
Yeah.
I did. But to your
Same.
point, it is a skill you learn. Not it wasn't
Yes.
easy to learn. It was a skill to learn. I did not enjoy it. And that's why I also tell
Mm-hmm.
people like law school or law is not what you think it is, especially when you've seen it online. And I feel like I am to blame here as well, because if I post a day in my life, it looks wonderful. I'm working in tech. We
I
have all
know.
these
Hmm.
perks. It's beautiful. You just told me you came from a trip to London. I'm packing right now to go to Singapore. That sounds incredible. Like my 5-year-old self would be like, oh my God, you're living the
Hmm.
dream. But that doesn't mean that's your entire life. And we're actually just sharing a
Right.
video that is 30 seconds to 50 seconds that is almost showing a
Right.
lifestyle and not what we actually do for work. So, yeah,
Hmm.
being in
Totally.
it is completely different, and I'm happy you relate to this because I feel like you're speaking my language and you understood my struggle from the start in law school.
I'm happy to know I'm not alone because it is really a struggle. And yeah, I think the if we did film an accurate day in the life, especially in the law firm days, it would just be sitting on a computer for 16
Yeah.
hours looking at documents, reading and writing.
I
So
think we have time for one more question.
okay,
Let's pick one
perfect.
here. Okay, let's end up in an inspiring note. What advice would you give to law students or young professionals considering a career in tech law to be more
It's a
specific?
great question. Yeah. I I think the main thing I would say is it is amazing to have goals and to, you know, plan out, 5 years ahead or a year ahead and have an idea of what you want to do. I think that's a great way to, be organized with your life. And I think we have a tendency to want to do that in this profession. So I think that's great. However, I really would encourage people to keep an open mind with opportunities, with yourself, like we talked about with your dreams and your goals, because sometimes when we're so rigid on what we think we want, we will miss opportunities that could be really great for us. And, there's your life is long, your career is long, and there's no one right way to be successful, to achieve your dreams. And, you know, just be open minded to things changing and you growing and evolving. In doing so, like there's so many doors and opportunities that will open up. If you had told me in law school that I would be at a big tech company and doing content creation and like having all these different like interests and pursuits in my life, I would never have imagined that. And I think um, I look back and think about the ways that I really was able to get to the next level was because I was open minded and I,
Yeah.
like for a second allowed myself to see all the different perspectives and the different pathways ahead of me. So that's kind of my main thing is like, it's a long career. You have such a long way. It feels like you have to know everything right now and you don't. It's great to have a goal, but just keep that open mind and just, just enjoy the journey as you're going through it because it's a great one.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much. I enjoyed this
Thank
conversation a
you.
lot. I
Me
love
too.
talking to you. I love relating to you. I really encourage all of you guys to go to her TikTok page. She has incredible content. I am going to personally go and listen to your podcast right now. Um, but you have such a beautiful way of expressing yourself and of explaining things. And I think that a lot of people like me will relate to you. So thank you so much for
Thank
accepting our
you.
invitation. I hope I can have you here again another day because there's so much that we can
Would love
discuss. I feel like we
that.
can talk for hours.
I
But thank you
know.
so much. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you. This was so much fun, and I'd come back anytime. This is great.